Hey everyone, it's Colin. How's it going? So, net neutrality is dead. What do we do now? This is an episode that I didn't necessarily want to do, or at least didn't want to have to do, but unfortunately we're there. A while back I did an episode about net neutrality, what it is and why it matters. And despite the wishes of many people online, it's become clear that net neutrality is dead. And this is both a political and a business issue. But unfortunately, the two have become very much intertwined, and the will of the business has pretty much taken over the will of the politicians, which is supposed to serve the will of the people. And that's why a lot of people have gotten upset about recent developments. It's become clear that when the FCC votes on a new proposal to basically kill net neutrality on December 14th, that it's going to pass. And I figured, you know what, let's talk about how we got to this point, and then what's life going to be like after that vote, and what, if anything, can we do about it? This is a complicated issue, and of course it's political in nature, and politics is one of those things that I've really wanted to try and stay away from with this channel for a very long time because it can be incredibly divisive. However, it's really difficult to separate the business aspect of this from what's actually going on in politics today. I don't want to get into any sort of mudslinging or name calling or generalizations. However, I do, of course, have my own opinions and feelings about this one. And if you just don't want to hear about politics, if you don't want to hear about these sorts of divisive issues, then this may be an episode that you just want to bail out on. So fair warning. But in the very least, we can start with some facts about how did we get here? What is this process, this vote actually going to be like? And how does it even work? So net neutrality was established by a guy named Tom Wheeler under the Obama administration. He was the chair of the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission at the time. And the argument was that ISPs have very limited competition across most of the United States. And so they effectively become gatekeepers to the internet for the people that they serve, their customers. But with limited competition, that means that they pretty much control what their customers can see. If they try to do something that customers aren't happy with, there's really limited recourse for customers to go and switch to a different ISP. In fact, where I live, I literally only have two choices for internet service providers. And one of them is really not much of a choice just because of how limited level of service they provide in my area. I kind of by de facto have just one ISP as an option. And I think that's the case for most of America. So the whole point behind net neutrality was really to try and basically keep the ISPs from taking advantage of their positions. It wasn't to try and improve competition. It wasn't try to regulate ISPs in terms of their prices that they would charge customers in really any other way. It was just to make sure that they didn't block or limit access to resources on the internet, which the government in all these proceedings have referred to as edge providers. That's an important term to remember. The whole point was just to prevent them from doing anything nefarious that would prevent access from consumers to edge providers, or to artificially increase the cost for edge providers to reach their customers, or for customers to be able to reach their edge providers, something like that. Of course, politics change, and we have a different political party that is predominantly in office now. Typically, the way it works with the FCC is there are 5 commissioners sitting that kind of govern the operations of the FCC. And one of those people is the chairperson. Like I said, Tom Wheeler was that person during the Obama administration. Now, the chair serves a 5-year term. That's an odd number, literally, especially compared to the 4-year term that the president serves. So typically what'll happen is if the president changes and it switches to another political party, whoever is the chair at the time, if their term isn't up yet, they will voluntarily resign. And that's what's happened in this case. So Tom Wheeler is no longer the chair of the FCC. It's another guy named Ajit Pai, and he was not just nominated, but appointed to that position by the president. And the president can put that person in power, and it takes the Senate to confirm them, which in this case has happened. So Ajit Pai is the person in charge, basically, of the FCC. Now, the other 4 people on that commission are evenly split between their political parties. So there are 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. And of course, they're going to have their own different agendas. But the idea behind 5 people being on the commission is that it becomes really hard to have a tie when it comes to votes. Previously, it was a 3-2 split, Democrats to Republicans, with Tom Wheeler being a Democrat. So the Democratic agenda managed to make its way through. Now it's a 3-2 split, Republicans to Democrats, because Ajit Pai is a Republican. So basically whatever he wants to have done is what's going to happen. So they proposed in April 2017 to more or less roll back all of the rules that the FCC had passed regarding net neutrality. The 2 key provisions is anti-blocking and then something called anti-discrimination. Now, anti-discrimination really just means you're not allowed to charge certain edge providers extra money for faster access or access at all to your customers. Anti-blocking means that you just can't completely block anything on the internet directly, especially if they don't pay you, right? It's that idea of trying to keep ISPs neutral. Now, in April 2017, that was all proposed as kind of a nebulous, just this is what we want to do type of thing. In November 2017, the details of that proposal finally came out, and it's under the name Restoring Internet Freedom, which makes me laugh in a bit because it's not restoring internet freedom at all, for reasons we'll get into. What's really funny is if you go and read that proposal, it is full of trash talking of the previous administration. It seems like pretty much everything that they talk about when it comes to this new proposal is that they're more or less just going to undo all the stuff that the previous administration did. Instead of trying to say this is something new that we want to try that will improve things for these reasons, it's more just like, hey, it worked fine the way it was before net neutrality. We're going to undo net neutrality and go back to it, which to me is already a little bit of a red flag when they just say we want to roll all this stuff back and put it back the way it was. It claims that the internet was basically just fine before net neutrality, that you know, the internet was perfect as it was for the 20 years or so before the net neutrality thing came to pass, and that it'll be just fine afterwards. But the thing that really strikes me is it completely ignores the fact that the internet has evolved, and it's evolved rapidly in the last few years. The way people use the internet 10, 15 years ago is dramatically different than the way that people use the internet now. And furthermore, because people have changed the way that they use the internet service providers have also changed the way that they do their business. They've tried to figure out new revenue streams, such as things like charging edge providers for faster access to customers, that sort of thing. So, you know, the proposal here basically says that net neutrality stifled competition and that repealing net neutrality will improve it. Well, that's a completely separate issue, probably best served even for another podcast episode. And what's more, they're also starting to talk about that they're going to overrule any kind of state-based laws that may have been passed regarding net neutrality. So more or less, even if the FCC says, you know what, no more net neutrality, these ISPs can effectively do whatever they want, if the state you live in passes a law saying, no, that's not true, we're still going to uphold some of those provisions and hold ISPs that operate within our state accountable for these net neutrality rules, the FCC is basically saying, no, our rules come first and override yours. What's also a little disconcerting, actually more than a bit disconcerting, is the fact that in parallel, the FCC has also been starting to roll back subsidies for broadband access to low-income households. Broadband is not cheap. I mean, the average internet bill in the US is probably somewhere between $50 and $75. That's a lot of money to spend if you're a low-income household. And considering the fact that life pretty much as we know it in the US needs access to the internet in some regard. And we're not talking because you want to watch Netflix or anything like that. We're talking because you want to do things like online banking or pay your bills or even fill out government forms and processes, that sort of thing. The internet has become so important that you pretty much need to have some level of access to it, especially if you've got kids in school who need to do homework and research, that sort of thing. So for a long time, the FCC has offered subsidies to help bring down that cost for broadband access to people who otherwise can't afford it. Those are starting to be rolled back as well. What really kind of got me going on this one is a Q&A kind of form that the FCC published called Myth versus Fact, where they take all these so-called myths, basically concerns that people are going to have regarding the repeal of net neutrality, and offers to correct them with so-called facts. There's something that I can basically blow a hole in on every single one of these records, and I will include a link to the PDF of this down in the description if you want to read it and or laugh at it. But there are 3 on here that I really want to address before we get into the portion of what's life going to be like without net neutrality. The first one is a myth saying internet service providers will block you from visiting the websites you want to visit. And their supposed fact is that ISPs didn't block websites before the Obama administration's so-called heavy-handed 2015 internet regulations, and they won't do so after net neutrality is repealed. And, you know, I'm like, yeah, that actually has happened. In fact, that's how net neutrality got started, specifically with paid agreements between ISPs and companies like Netflix. ISPs would say, hey, look, Netflix, you're consuming a lot of bandwidth on our network because your customers want to watch service and they happen to be customers of ours. How about you pay up? Well, you know, Netflix is like, I guess you've got us over a barrel, and they had to pay. And what did they do? They passed that cost onto their own customers. So your prices for Netflix went up because of actions by your ISP. So to say that, you know, effectively ISPs won't block you from visiting the website is wrong, because they've already started to head down that path anyway. And we'll talk about that a bit more a little later on. The next one is broadband providers will charge you a premium if you want to reach online content. Same thing. You know, maybe the broadband provider won't necessarily charge you directly to reach some online content, but you are going to pay more, using the example that I just explained. And again, I've got some more coming up in a little bit. The other thing about that whole question and answer about, you know, broadband providers will charge you more and the FCC is saying, no, they won't, don't worry about it, is right here in the explanation. This didn't happen before, which is wrong, and it won't happen after the repealed. Well, what crystal ball does the FCC have to know what the future is going to be like? How can they say with confidence it's not going to happen? I don't know. Could somebody explain that to me about like where the FCC is able to get in their DeLorean and go to the future and say definitively it won't happen? I don't know, because I don't buy it. One of the final ones on here of many things that I have issues with, but this is perhaps the most funny one, not necessarily in a ha-ha kind of way, but is regarding the comment period that the FCC opened up, because that's something that the FCC generally does, is when they have a proposal for changing something, they're going to open up what they call a comment period for people, you know, in the public to offer their own opinion and commentary on that change. Do they like it? Do they not like it? What are the reasons why? That sort of thing. And they've done that for plenty of other initiatives that they wanted to do. They did it again for this one with the, you know, the whole repealing net neutrality thing. And there was an overwhelming response to that commentary period, because there was actually a bit of a grassroots effort for people to become aware of what was going to go on and make their voice heard. And the evidence suggests that overwhelmingly the people who commented in favor of net neutrality. Basically, they told the FCC, no, we don't want this new change to happen. Leave it the way it was. The FCC is trying to defend itself and is basically calling all of those comments bunk. So the myth here is that more than 22 million people have filed comments with the agency. They overwhelmingly want the FCC to preserve and protect net neutrality. That's something the FCC is calling a myth. What's funny is the response from the FCC that they call a fact. Here's the direct quote. "The commenting process is not an opinion poll." Then what in the hell is it? The comment process is not an opinion poll? Are you for real? Then what purpose does a comment process even serve? To tell the FCC, yes, sure, do whatever the hell you want? Give me a freaking break here. Of course it's an opinion poll. That's the reason why it exists. The FCC is just trying to steamroll over any of the pro-net neutrality comments that they received. And what's more, a lot of the anti-net neutrality comments that they received have been demonstrated to have been filed fraudulently using stolen information on Americans. In fact, there are websites you can go to check to see if a comment against net neutrality was filed in your name without your permission. That's how bad of an issue that was. And the FCC is just trying to steamroll the entire thing and say, oh, no, it's all the pro net neutrality comments that were false. Give me a break. So where do we go from here? Like what's going to be the game plan? What's going to happen? Well, it goes to a vote on December 14th, where the FCC is very, very likely going to pass the repeal of net neutrality. What can be done after that? Well, there are really two things as far as I'm aware of, and I'm not any sort of legal government scholar or anything, but remembering my basic civics classes in like high school, it sounds like the path after the FCC is Congress can get involved. So if Congress doesn't like something that the FCC is doing, it can basically pass a law on its own saying, no, this is the way it's going to be, and the FCC has to follow it. Well, yeah, sad to say, Congress is also controlled by the Republicans this term, so it's unlikely that they're going to want to undo something that basically their colleagues over in the FCC are wanting to get done. The only thing above Congress is really the Supreme Court to determine whether something is legal or not. Now, the Supreme Court can't really write a law saying net neutrality is legal. But so the Supreme Court can rule on specific cases saying whether something is legal or not as it stands. And the question of whether this would be an issue that would even make it to the Supreme Court is one. And then the other would be, would the Supreme Court even want to hear it? Either way, things generally don't get to the Supreme Court very quickly. So if it did come to that, it's going to be years before a case like that finally gets heard. And chances are, if a ruling were to get handed down, it would be pretty limited in scope. So what do? Let's just assume that it's going to get passed. And let's assume that anti-net neutrality kind of doctrine is going to stick around for at least a year. What's life going to be like for us? Well, the first thing that people could necessarily think about is, well, maybe nothing will ever change. Maybe the FCC is right. Maybe it'll all be good and happy and fine and the internet will continue as it is. Well, that'd be really nice, but that's really unlikely because ISPs have been chomping at the bit already to implement either blocking or paid prioritization, that whole discrimination thing that they call it in legal terms. And there are many cases already in place of this, demonstrating this because ISPs have already done it. Right now, in fact, Charter Communications is fighting a lawsuit in New York State about poor service, and it's already using the impending repeal of net neutrality as an excuse as to why it should be ruled in its favor. Furthermore, Comcast has softened its net neutrality pledge between when net neutrality was a real for sure cemented thing and when those new proposals came out in earlier in 2017. And there are even screenshots and articles that people have done saying that key statements that Comcast said about they won't block, they won't throttle, all that kind of stuff, those have been dramatically scaled back. They were done the same day that the anti-net neutrality stuff started to come out earlier in 2017, the same day. Yeah, that says a lot about Comcast and its commitment to net neutrality. Furthermore, in 2013, and this is a big one, Verizon admitted in court that the only reason it's not able to engage in paid prioritization or blocking is because of the FCC open internet rules. Now, in 2013 was when the FCC had it in this kind of proposed stage, right? It hadn't been cemented and finalized. In fact, Verizon took the FCC to court, which is why they were in court arguing about it, about, no, you can't pass these rules because they're illegal or whatever. There are two key quotes from that case in late 2013 when three judges in the Washington, D.C., if I'm remembering correctly, district court, were arguing with the lawyer from Verizon and a lawyer from the FCC, basically having them defend each of their positions. There are two key quotes when those judges were asking and trying to clarify with the lawyer for Verizon what she meant and why Verizon believed, it should be able to basically do what it wants and that these new open internet rules didn't apply. There are two key quotes, and I'm going to play them for you now.
I keep coming back to the proposition, if I'm legally entitled to charge and somebody refuses to pay, why can't I block?
I think we should be able to. In the world I'm positing, you would be able to.
Is the world you're positing that it's illegal for the FCC to prohibit you from blocking if the purpose of blocking is to enforce a charge which the customer, the edge provider, refuses to pay?
Yes.
For normal service, you can't charge at all. No edge provider has to pay anything unless they want faster service.
Not under these rules. They pay nothing for access, for basic service.
Your claim is you're entitled to charge.
Yes.
And if somebody refuses to pay, you think you're entitled to block.
Yes, it's the ban on.
Why are you even hesitating? That seems so obvious.
So yeah, there you go. Very clear. Yes. Basically, does Verizon think that it should be able to charge companies for access to its network or access to faster speeds? Very clearly, they said yes. Verizon wants this just like all the other ISPs in America. So the concept, the idea, the thought that things are just going to be as they were, no, I don't buy it at all. So one of two real life scenarios I think is going to play out. The first one is that there's the idea that ISPs are going to start charging the customers directly based on the kind of content that they want to access. And there have been made up infographics distributed in social media. I saw one on Twitter not too long ago about kind of a, almost like cable TV where you can pick what type of internet package you want. And it's not just speed. It's like what kind of resources you want to get to, where, if you want to use Netflix and YouTube and Hulu and other streaming video, you have to pay an extra X amount of money per month. And maybe if you want access to social media, you have to pay an extra X amount of money per month and all that. And those would be charges directly passed to the consumers from the ISP itself. The ISP would directly pocket that money. It would be an item that would appear on your internet bill every month. And that's a really scary thought, but I don't think that's very likely to happen simply because ISPs don't want to look like the bad guys, because then actual action will happen. And it all comes back to that whole semi-monopoly thing. When you think about it, and this is all in the realm of wired home internet access. Mobile, like your smartphone data plan, that's a completely separate issue from this. It kind of ties in, but when you think about an ISP trying to deliver access to your house, what do they have to do? They have to install wires. That's a very expensive affair, and they have to get special permission from all the property owners in the city, go through all sorts of government red tape and stuff in order to actually install all of that cabling between their facilities and your house or your apartment building or your office or whatever. Just because of the expense and the time it takes and the red tape and all the legal crap they have to go through, by default, you're really not going to have much competition when it comes to ISPs. Like I said, in my area, and I live in Minneapolis, this is a pretty big metropolitan area, I literally have 2 options, one of which I think maxes out at maybe 12 megabits DSL with something like half a megabit upload, and that's not very reliable service. And by the way, that particular company happens to be under active investigation by the Minnesota Attorney General for deceptive billing practices. The other option is cable internet, which offers decent speed, but not that great of prices, of course, and things like data caps, which as a YouTuber I love to hate because I constantly have to worry about, is an upload going to push me over that data cap? So ISPs don't really want to look like the bad guys, because if they do look like the bad guys, consumers may finally get fed up with the whole monopoly scenario, which is something that they've not necessarily been happy with, but have tolerated. It may be enough to push them over the edge, where consumers will finally go to their government and say, look, we need some real competition. You need to relax the rules. Or you need to cut a deal with another ISP to get some real competition in town, something like that. That's something that the existing incumbent ISPs desperately do not want to have happen. So they cannot look like the bad guys. That's why Comcast came out with that pseudo net neutrality pledge that they did to make everybody feel better about, oh, they actually do care about me and you know what I care about, and you know, open access to the internet and all that. But it's really telling that, again, the day that the proposed change to net neutrality to eliminate it came out earlier in 2017, that Comcast started changing those statements, it's pretty transparent as to what's going on. So direct charges from ISPs to consumers, I don't think that's very likely. The more likely thing is going to be where you've got ISPs cutting deals with the content providers directly. Those are called edge providers in all of these legal cases, but it really just means, you know, all the services and websites you go to, you know, so Netflix and Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and Google and everything really that you go to, they're all considered edge providers. It's something that's already been happening, as I said. That's really where net neutrality started, where we started to see these paid prioritization things, but we've also seen blocking happen as well. And there are some really good examples of blocking that has happened. One that happened back in 2011 was, and this is a wireless case, but you know, the internet's all interconnected anyway, where MetroPCS blocked all video streaming for its customers except for YouTube back in 2011, just straight up blocked it. On top of that, in 2011, Verizon blocked Google Wallet. Why? Because it competed with Verizon's own upcoming mobile payments offering. They didn't want that competition. They controlled the network, so they figure, okay, well, if people can't use Google Wallet, then they'll have to use ours. And then the third example is, I believe in 2013, if my memory serves, or 2012, somewhere around there, AT&T started blocking FaceTime access except for people who were on certain data plans. That's where we start getting into the paid prioritization thing. It was more or less a shakedown. Now, Apple wasn't really willing to pay AT&T for the whole, hey, let's, you know, make sure that everyone can do FaceTime kind of a thing. But AT&T was reserving it only for its more profitable customers. So that's something to keep in mind here. So that paid prioritization game is really just going to get amped up, and that's most likely what's going to happen. So we'll see ISPs making backroom kind of deals with all these major content providers, saying, hey, you know, YouTube, do you get pissed off from customers, you know, who complain about, you know, videos buffering too much? Do you really want to sell more ad revenue, you know, and actually have people continue to watch YouTube and everything and not just get upset because the video won't load? You know, let's cut a deal for some extra bandwidth here, shall we? That's the exact kind of thing that's going to happen. And that's going to happen en masse. It's going to happen with pretty much any really popular website or service, at least to start. But it may scale from there on, and that's where things start to get really scary. It's a chilling effect, because now you're going to start looking at all these smaller companies that are maybe beginning to make headway on the internet, but they're not making a ton of money yet. And if it, you know, came to it, if it was a paid prioritization deal that kept them alive versus not, that kind of money may be enough to push them over the edge. This hasn't necessarily happened yet, but I think the case of Vidme is a really good example. Now, Vidme is a competitor to YouTube. The whole idea was basically just, watch Vidme instead because it doesn't do all the really annoying crap that YouTube does. It pays its creators well, that kind of thing. Well, as I'm filming this, Vidme has announced that it's shutting down. It couldn't make it work. Vidme simply didn't have enough people visiting the site. It couldn't make that kind of revenue to attract more talent, to attract more people to want to watch, to actually make it be a long-term viable platform. But Vidme stuck around for a decent length of time. It really tried. I mean, I even signed up for a Vidme account. Granted, I didn't really upload anything to it because I was still hesitating whether it was worth it. But plenty of other YouTubers gave it a shot as well. But even then, that still wasn't enough for Vidme to make it. Could you imagine if when Vidme first started, AT&T and Verizon and Comcast and all the other major ISPs in the United States came knocking on its door going, "Oh, hey, yeah, so we heard that you're a new internet video service, right? That's a lot of bandwidth, isn't it? Huh? Boy, sure would be a shame if, viewers for your brand new service had a bad first impression with lots of, slowdowns and buffering and stuff, right? Maybe we should come to some kind of agreement where we can make sure that you've got all the bandwidth that you need." Could you imagine how long Vidme would have lasted? It wouldn't. In fact, that's going to be something that entrepreneurs are going to have to think about going forward when they launch new services that rely on the internet, is factoring that cost, basically that shakedown cost from the ISPs about if they're going to need better bandwidth than what the base level ISP is going to be willing to give them. To speak nothing of the fact that maybe the ISP has a competing offering that it would much rather have its customers use because it would make more money on. Do you think a startup would even stand a chance against a major ISP that wanted to offer the same thing? I am, of course, curious as to your thoughts. And I know this is a hot button issue and it's got people very, very passionate in their opinions. So all I ask is that we have a very civil and adult conversation down in the comments below. It's totally okay if you're against net neutrality. I just want to know why in reasonable terms, right? So we can have a real, frank, open, honest, respectful discussion down there. So I'm curious as to your thoughts. Be sure to leave those down in the comments below. If you liked the video, I would appreciate a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram @thisdoesnotcomp. And as always, thanks for watching.